The 1980s didn't just produce hit songs, it produced era-defining moments. One massive single dominating the airwaves each year. Today we're journeying through the decade, one year at a time, tracing the single song that topped America's charts more than any other. As the years pass, the sound of the decade transforms completely. 1. Call Me. The decade opened with a collision between disco's fading pulse and punk's raw urgency, and Blondie captured both perfectly. Producer Giorgio Moroder had been asked to write a theme for the film American Gigolo, and rather than handing Blondie a finished song, he sent Debbie Harry an instrumental track and let her write the lyrics herself, working through the night to meet the deadline. The result blended driving guitar with a relentless, hypnotic groove. That felt entirely new, a sound that belonged to neither the disco era ending nor whatever was coming next. It spent 6 weeks at #1, becoming the year's biggest hit and cementing Blondie as one of New Wave's defining acts, while also marking the band's commercial peak in America. Reports from the sessions suggest the band recorded several versions of the vocal before settling on the icy calm that made the final cut. Debbie Harry's cool, detached vocal delivery gave the song an edge that separated it from typical disco fare, hinting at where pop music was headed next. She sang about obsession and control with a flatness that felt almost dangerous, refusing to oversell a single line. From here, the decade's sound starts shifting towards something moodier and more atmospheric. 2. Bette Davis Eyes.
She got Betty Davis eyes, she'll take a tumble on you.
Kim Carnes turned a song originally written years earlier into one of the defining hits of the early 80s, built around a hypnotic synthesizer riff and her distinctively raspy vocal delivery. The song had first been recorded in 1974 by co-writer Jackie DeShannon in a much softer folk-pop arrangement that barely registered with listeners, and it sat largely forgotten for years before Carnes and producer Val Garay reimagined it almost entirely. Their version stripped away the warmth and replaced it with something colder and more mechanical, a synthesizer pulse that mirrored the calculating woman described in the lyrics. It spent 9 weeks at #1, becoming the year's biggest single and helping usher synthesizers further into mainstream pop production at a moment when the instrument was still viewed with some suspicion by traditional rock audiences. Garay reportedly layered the synths in the mix so heavily that some session musicians worried the vocal would get buried entirely. The lyrics painted a portrait of a magnetic, dangerous kind of woman, and Carnes delivered every line with knowing confidence rather than judgment. Her voice worn and smoky, in a way few other female pop vocalists of the era could match. It remains one of the most instantly recognizable vocal performances of the entire decade. 3. Physical.
Let's get physical, physical. I wanna get physical.
Olivia Newton-John shed her wholesome image almost entirely with this workout anthem turned double entendre, and America could not stop playing it. She had spent the previous decade as pop's reigning girl next door, and label executives reportedly worried the song's suggestive lyrics might alienate the family-friendly audience that had made her a star. So the video leaned hard into gym imagery to soften the innuendo for radio and television alike. Spending an astonishing 10 weeks at #1, it became one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade, driven partly by its aerobics music video, and partly by lyrics far cheekier than radio was used to from her. Several radio stations even edited certain lines before airing the song, unsure how listeners would react to the shift in her image. Its fitness-crazed timing was nearly perfect, arriving just as home workout culture was exploding across the country, with leg warmers and leotards becoming a genuine fashion movement almost overnight. The song also helped launch a wave of fitness-themed music videos that dominated MTV for the next several years. It remains one of the most successful singles in Billboard history, a reminder that reinvention, done boldly, could dominate an entire year. 4. Every Breath You Take.
Every breath you take, and every move
The Police built their biggest hit around a deceptively gorgeous melody, hiding deeply unsettling lyrics about obsession and control. Sting wrote the song during the collapse of his first marriage, sitting alone at a piano in the middle of the night, and later admitted he was troubled by how many listeners mistook its possessive, watchful narrator for a romantic hero. Spending 8 weeks at number 1, it became the year's most dominant single and eventually won the Grammy for Song of the Year, cementing the band's commercial peak just before their eventual split. The band reportedly clashed in the studio over the arrangement, with drummer Stuart Copeland pushing for a rawer sound than the polished final mix that made the charts. Sting's smooth, restrained vocal delivery made the song's darker undertones easy to miss entirely, and millions of listeners embraced it as a tender love song rather than the surveillance anthem it actually was, choosing wedding first dances without registering the lyrics' menace. Guitarist Andy Summers' spare, arpeggiated guitar line became just as central to the song's identity as the vocal itself, a hook nearly as recognizable as the words. Decades of hip-hop and pop samples have kept that guitar line circulating long after the original single left the charts. A quick note here, if you're enjoying this trip through the decade's biggest songs, hitting subscribe helps more of these countdowns find you. 5. When Doves Cry. Prince delivered one of the strangest, boldest number 1 hits of the decade with this track, built almost entirely without a bass line, a choice most producers would have considered commercially reckless. He reportedly stripped the bass out at the very last minute, convinced the song sounded more unsettling and more urgent without it, even as engineers around him questioned whether radio would accept something so sparse. Pulled from the soundtrack to his film Purple Rain, the song spent 5 weeks at number 1 and became the year's biggest single, proving that genuine artistic risk could still dominate mainstream radio in an era of increasingly polished production. Prince reportedly wrote, played, and produced nearly every element of the track himself, working alone in the studio through several sleepless nights. Prince's falsetto and raw emotional delivery carried the track entirely on vulnerability rather than typical hooks, his voice cracking at moments most artists would have smoothed over in the studio. It remains one of the most sonically daring songs to ever top the charts, a reminder that breaking convention could still mean total commercial dominance. 6. Careless Whisper.
Careless whispers of the good.
George Michael, still officially part of Wham, at the time delivered a solo ballad so different from the duo's usual upbeat pop that it changed how audiences saw him entirely. He wrote the song as a teenager, years before Wham ever formed, reportedly composing the melody on a bus ride home from his part-time job, and he carried the idea for years before finally recording it as a statement of his own artistic identity. Built around one of the most recognizable saxophone riffs in pop history, the song became the year's biggest hit, spending 3 weeks at number 1 in the US and far longer internationally, including an 8-week run atop the UK charts. Session saxophonist Steve Gregory's contribution became so central to the song's identity that many listeners still associate the instrument itself with heartbreak because of this single track. The song's accompanying video, shot on a sun-drenched Miami beach, added a layer of glamorous melancholy that matched its lyrics perfectly. Decades later, that saxophone hook remains instantly identifiable, one of the most iconic musical signatures to emerge from the entire decade. 7. That's What Film Soundtrack. This song found new life and new purpose when Dionne Warwick reassembled it as a charity single featuring Elton John, Gladys Knight, and Stevie Wonder. The original 1982 version, sung by Rod Stewart over the closing credits of a little-scene comedy, had gone almost entirely unnoticed until producer Clive Davis suggested reviving it for a cause that desperately needed a public voice. All proceeds benefited AIDS research at a moment when the crisis desperately needed both funding and public compassion, with the disease still widely stigmatized and misunderstood by much of the American public. It spent 4 weeks at number 1, becoming the year's biggest hit while raising millions for a cause still largely ignored by mainstream institutions at the time. Gathering 4 major stars into one studio proved logistically difficult, and coordinating their individual schedules delayed the recording sessions by several months. Each artist recorded their verses separately before the vocals were woven together. Yet the final performance feels unmistakably unified, a chorus of voices refusing to look away from a crisis others avoided discussing. The single's proceeds went directly toward AIDS research organizations at a time when government funding for the cause remained deeply inadequate. It remains one of the most successful charity singles in music history, proof that compassion, packaged thoughtfully, could dominate the charts. 8. Walk Like an Egyptian.
Walk like an Egyptian.
The Bangles built one of the decade's most distinctive hits around an irresistibly quirky hook, and a music video built entirely around its title's visual gimmick. Songwriter Liam Sternberg reportedly wrote the track after watching people awkwardly navigate a rocking ferry, their unsteady movements resembling hieroglyphic poses, and the band initially had reservations about recording something so overtly novelty-driven. First reaching number 1 in the final weeks of 1986, it carried that momentum into 1987 to become the year's top song. Driven by heavy MTV rotation and radio's inability to resist its catchiness, despite the band's own early skepticism about its commercial potential. The band reportedly considered the track a filler song during recording sessions, never expecting it to become their signature hit. Susanna Hoff's playful vocal delivery gave the track a wink of self-awareness, never taking its own novelty too seriously. While the rest of the band traded lead lines throughout the song in a way that felt genuinely collaborative, its blend of new wave production and sing-along simplicity made it a rare crossover hit that appealed to nearly every radio format simultaneously, from pop to college rock stations. The song's success briefly overshadowed the band's more guitar-driven material, a tension that would eventually contribute to their split just a few years later. It remains one of the most joyfully strange number 1 hits of the decade, proof that pure fun could still dominate an entire year's airwaves. 9. Faith. George Michael fully stepped into his solo identity with this title track, trading Wham! Jashim's bubblegum energy for something rootsier, more confident, and unmistakably his own. He wrote and produced the album almost entirely by himself, determined to prove he was more than a pop teen idol left over from his Wham! Days, and the stripped-down, rockabilly-inflected sound of the single announced that transformation immediately. First reaching number 1 in late 1987, it carried into 1988 to become that year's biggest hit, driven by its instantly recognizable acoustic guitar intro and Michael's newly matured vocal swagger. Michael reportedly fought his label over the album's direction, insisting on creative control that few young pop stars were granted at the time. The accompanying music video, all-leather jacket, and jukebox imagery became just as iconic as the song itself, cementing a bold new visual identity that MTV audiences immediately latched onto. Critics, who had once dismissed him as a lightweight pop act, were forced to reconsider his artistry almost overnight. Decades later, it remains one of the most confident reinventions of the decade, a genuine artistic and commercial triumph. 10. Look Away. Chicago closed out the decade with a quiet, aching ballad, a notable departure from the horn-driven rock that had defined the band decades earlier. By the late 80s, the group had shifted almost entirely towards soft rock balladry, a pivot that alienated some longtime fans even as it delivered the band its biggest commercial successes of the era. First reaching number 1 in late 1988, it carried into 1989 to become the year's biggest hit, spending weeks at the top of the chart during its extended run and outperforming flashier, more talked-about singles released that same year. Longtime fans of the band's horn-driven 70s catalog reportedly felt this era represented the group's furthest departure yet from its original sound. Its lyrics of heartbreak and quiet resignation felt like a fitting bookend to a decade that had swung between excess and vulnerability so many times, closing things out on a note of restraint rather than spectacle. The song's restrained, adult contemporary sound signaled where much of mainstream pop was heading as the decade closed, foreshadowing the softer, more introspective tone much of early 90s radio would adopt. Unlike the band's earlier brass-heavy hits, the track features almost no horns at all, a deliberate choice that still surprises longtime fans encountering it for the first time. Its extended chart run made it one of the longest-lasting #1 songs to bridge 2 separate calendar years in the decade. It remains a somewhat overlooked #1 hit today, overshadowed by flashier songs from the same years, yet it holds the distinction of closing out the entire decade at the very top. From Blondie's Cool Detachment to Chicago's Quiet Farewell, the 1980s proved just how far pop music could stretch in 10 short years, through synth pop, glam, charity anthems, and reinvention after reinvention. Which of these songs defined your decade? Let us know in the comments. And if this trip through the 80s brought back memories, subscribe and join us for the next one.